Hello, welcome to lesson 15 Constructors in C Sharp, brought to you by Ankpro Technologies. My name is Harish. In this session we are going to learn what is constructor and the types of constructor. Right now we'll jump into constructor and we'll see the definition of it. What is constructor? Constructor is used to initialize an object of a class. Means it is used to create an instance of a class. And how do constructor look like? Constructor is like a method without any return type. In the previous session we saw how the method will look, and now the constructor is similar like a method but without any return type. To understand that, we'll explore it while coding. Constructor has same name as class name. It means that whatever the class name we are having, and exactly the constructor will also have the same class name. This is how we define the constructor. Constructor will be defined with the class name. Means constructor has same name as class name. Constructor follows the access scope, and it means that constructor follows the access scope. Means constructor can be a public, private, protected, internal and external. This is the definition of constructor. And to, now there are types of constructor. That is, there are 5 types: default constructor, parameterized constructor, copy constructor, static constructor and private constructor. Now we'll see one by one. First we'll see how to define a constructor by using the default constructor type. Now we'll see in the types of constructor, the first one is default constructor. Now we'll fire up Visual Studio, and I'm having a project called constructor demo where I'm having all the 5 demos for constructor. That is one constructor demo for private, that is default constructor, and copy constructor, parameter constructor demo, private constructor and static constructor. First, the constructor demo. Here I'm going to show you the default constructor, how it works. Now what I've done here is I've created a class, and first I've created a class C1, and I'm having 2 variables. I'm initialized 2 variables, that is A and B. Now I've created a constructor. How do we create a constructor? Constructor name is always the name as in the slide. In the presentation we saw constructor is like a method without any return type. Yes, this is how we have defined here. Constructor, this is like a method. It is same as the class name. The constructor name is same as the class name. You can observe here. Here is the constructor C1 and it is same as the class name C1. Now it looks like a method. This is a method and this is a constructor. You can observe the major changes here is it do not have the return type void. It is not having void. The thing is, constructor, it always start with the class name followed by the modifier, access modifier. It can be public, private, whatever it is, and this is how we will define a constructor. Now once I'm having the variables A and B, I have to initialize the values for that. Who will initialize that values? That work will be done by the constructor. Here we are having this dot A is equal to 10 and this dot B is equal to 20. What does this refers to? This tells us, this means it refers to the instance of this class C1. It refers to the instance of class C1. This. Now once I'm having the constructor, this is a default constructor. Why? Because for this constructor we are not passing any parameters. Parameters are empty. Therefore this is default constructor. Now I'm also having a method called display method. What it will do is it will take the values 10 and 20. It will print here. Now to do that work, I'm using console.writeline. I'm calling the variables A and B. Once I'm calling that variables, these variables will display the values A and 10. Okay. Now my class, I'm having a class. Within that class I'm having a constructor. Constructor is used to initialize the values to the variables A and B. Once it is done, it is this variables, this constructor values, this A and B initialized values are called in the display method, and whenever we create an object of class C1, constructor will get invoked. That we'll see that. In the main method we are creating an object of C1. That is, we are creating an instance of C1 class 1. We are creating an object of class C1. How? C1 object ob1 means object 1 is equal to new keyword is used to create an object of class C1, and this is how do you create an object. Now once I'm having the object, now see ob object dot display method is called. Okay, this is how when you create an instance of the class, default constructor will be called. Now I'll just like love to show this. ob1 dot, when I press the dot, I'm getting a display method. This is what, when you create an instance of the class, default constructor will be called. Now when I'm calling that method, you can observe here, when you create an instance of the class, means I'm creating an object of the class C1. Whenever immediately I create the object of C1, the display method will be accessed using the object ob1. This is the example for default constructor. When I over on this, you can see here c1 dot c1. This is the default constructor. C1 dot, the black the text which is highlighted in the black color is the constructor. Okay, this is the example for default constructor. Now we'll jump back into the presentation. Parameterized constructor, a constructor with at least one parameter. Okay, we'll see in the demo now. Now this is default constructor. The next constructor we are going to learn is parameter constructor. It means that exactly the same program what I'm having here, but instead of leaving empty, I'll just pass the parameters here. Instead of leaving empty in this constructor, I want to pass parameters, whether it can be int a comma int b, something like that. I'm having example for that also. I would love to show that. First I'll set it as start a project. First I'll run the program for default constructor. We'll see what output we'll get. The output will be like 10 and 20. My file is being scanned by Avast. Let's wait for that. It's been checking whether it is free or not. Okay, now once I'm done with this, it will provide me an output 10 and 20. Now once it is completed, okay, now the value of a and b is printed. This is how the constructor work. Constructor mainly used to initialize a object or initialize values to a variables which is present in the class. This is the use of constructor. Now we'll see the copy constructor. We'll see the parameterized constructor. This is the example for parameterized constructor. Now I'll set it as startup project. Once I set it as startup project, I'll just close this program. I'll open the program in parameter constructor. See, the difference between the default constructor and the parameterized constructor is default constructor will not have any parameters and the parameterized constructor will have a parameters. It is similar to the previous example which we saw in the default constructor, but here we initialize variables a and b, and in the constructor we are assigning values to it by passing parameters. We are having two parameters called x and y, and return type of them is integer type. Now this dot a is equal to x, this dot b is equal to y. We are assigning x and y to a and b, values of x and y to a and b variables. Now this refers to instance of the class C1. Instance of the class C1. This refers to instance of the class C1. Now I'm having a method which will print a and b as printed in the previous example, but here I'm creating an object. Keep in mind, in the last example we did not pass the parameters, but the thing here is, since it is a parameterized constructor, we have to pass two values when I'm calling it. Now I have to pass two parameters, 10, 20. So ob1 dot, and using the object we are calling the display method. Now once I run this program, I have to get the output as expected. The file is again being scanned. Let's wait for that. Okay, once it is scanned, it provided me the output telling that it provided me the output as expected. The value of a and b is 10. This is what the default parameterized constructor. In the default constructor will not pass the parameters. In the parameterized constructors will pass the parameters to the constructor and will assign those parameter values to the variables in the class defined, and will call it in the display method. And when I create an object and call the display method in the main method, it should print those values which are assigned to x and y, that is 10 and 20. This is how the parameterized constructor work. We'll jump back into the presentation. The second is copy constructor. How the copy constructor works, we'll see. I'll just close this program. Copy constructor is this part. I'm setting it as startup project. You can observe here I'm having 3 projects in my solution. If I want to run if I want to run the particular project, then every time I have to set it as startup project. I'm having program for copy constructor. What is this copy constructor? Means a parameterized constructor that contains a parameter. Okay. Now this is I'm having a very simple example here to understand what is copy constructor. This is class sample. In this class sample, what I'm trying to do here is I'm having 2 variables, that is parameter 1 and parameter 2 of return type string. Now I am using the parameterized constructor here. You can observe here I'm having 2 parameters of type string. Variable name is x and y, 2 parameters x and y of return type string, and I'm assigning x to parameter 1, y to parameter 2 for this. This is the usage of the constructor. This is the parameterized constructor. Now my objective is to show the demo on copy constructor, how it works. It's very simple. You create another constructor, public sample, and just create an object of it, that is sample. Just create the object of that class sample, and once I'm having that object, what I'm trying to do here is parameter 1 is equal to obj dot parameter, this object dot parameter, and parameter 2 is equal to obj dot parameter 2. It's whatever, it's creating an object and copying that, creating an object. Copy constructor, it is creating an object of the class sample, then it is accessing, that object is accessing parameter 1 and parameter 2, and in return it is storing in the parameter 1 and parameter 2 also. Now once I create object of the class sample like this, I want to pass parameters because I'm having 2 parameters here, x and y. Welcome C#. So in the next, again I'll create another object. Now in this second object what I'm created, I want the value which is present in the previous object. Okay, it means I want the parameterized constructor to be copied again, Now what I'll do is simply I'll just call the previous object which I've created in the current object, that is object 1. In the object 1 I'm calling the previously created object such that all the details in the obj object will be copied to obj1. Now obj1 dot parameter is equal to obj1 dot parameter. Now if I access that, I'll get the output as welcome C#. We'll see that. Yes, this is what the output we expected. What it did was, I'm having parameterized constructor. I'm also creating another constructor, but I'm creating a object of class sample. So when I create an object of sample, I'm able to access from that object the parameters which are created in the parameterized constructor. So object 1 dot parameter 1, object 2 dot parameter 1. Now if I create an object of sample in the main method, and I'll create a instance of the sample, and since I'm having the parameterized constructor, I have to give 2 values. I've given it as welcome C#. Now sample object 1, I'm creating another object. In that object I want the previous values which are present in the object obj to be copied to obj1. Now how to do that, just print it on the console. You will be verified whether it is copied or not. As I run the example, yes, it is copied. This is the example for copy constructor. Now we'll jump back into the presentation. Static constructor. Static constructor means it will be invoked only once for any number of instances of the classes. You can create only one static constructor. We'll see that. Now I'm having static constructor. I'll set it as a project. Once it is set, I'll expand this. Okay, static constructor. I'm having a class test. And I'm having 2 static fields like name and age. Now I'm having a constructor called test, and it is static. Console dot, don't worry about what is static, we'll see in the upcoming sessions. Just of now I'll explain in just of now I'll not tell in brief what is static, I'll just explain how to this example. Static test console.writeLine, this is the statement to be printed. Now I'm calling this variables name and age, and I'm assigning the values. Okay, now once I'm assigned the values, I want to display it. Now I'm displaying them in the display method. Once I'll create the object, since it is static member, since it's a static, the constructor is static, I want, since the constructor is static, I can't access the static constructor using the object. I can't access using the object like this. Previously, as we did, we created an object, right? Program p is equal to new program p is equal to p new program p dot. When I do that, I'll not get any the display method. Why? Because since it is static, you can't access using the object of that class. You can't create object of, you can create an object, but you can't access the display method because it is a static constructor. So how to access this constructor? We can access this constructor using the class name itself. So the class name is test, so I've taken test dot. Whenever I press the dot operator, it will provide me a display method. Since it is static, we have to invoke the class by calling from the class name itself. So when I run this program, it has to provide me two things. The output will be shown. This is the output as expected. You can observe here, use static constructor initialize, okay, and it's providing the output as John Cena and 23. This is the example of static constructor. Now we'll jump back into presentation. Private constructor is used to restrict the class from being instantiated. It is used to restrict the class from being instantiated, used when class contains every member as static. You have to use the private constructor when class contains every member in the class as static only. In order to understand, we have an example for that. This is the example private constructor. I'll set it as start a project first. I'll close the remaining projects also. Now I'm going to show you how private constructor works. Now I'm having a class called C1. Okay. Once I'm having this class, I'm having two variables called A and B, and I'm having a private constructor C1, and I'm having private parameterized. I'm also having the parameters in it, int x and y. Now this dot A is equal to x. I'm assigning the values x and y to A and B. This refers to the instance of the class C1. Now public static C1 create instance, return new. I'm having a method called create instance, and I'm having a method called create instance, return new the values, that is 12 and 20. Okay, this method will return values 12 and 20, and it is static method. And I'm having display method. What it does is int z is equal to a plus b, and I'm printing that z. Okay, now very simple. Here the class is being initiated using the static method of the class, then only you can use private constructor. Static method, where is the static method? Yes, it's here. Now public static C1 is equal to create instance. This is what the private constructor. Now public static C1 create instance, C1 create instance. Now I'll just remove this just for a while. Okay, okay, now I'm having public access modifier static as a keyword, and this method is static method. Okay, I'm having a class called program private constructor demo, and the program C1, that is class 1. Here what I'm trying to do here is I'm I'm trying to return the values C1. I'm trying to return the values 12 and 20, which is in the constructor, that is private constructor. These values will go and sit in the parameters x and y, which is a parameterized constructor, which is a private constructor. You can define how it is, you can see how it is defined. Private constructor can be defined using the private keyword, using the and followed by the class name and parameters. Now, and private constructor can be accessed only by the static method. Then once I'm having a static method, when I return the values, these values will go and sit in the private constructor variables, that is x and y. So here I'm creating an object, and once I'm creating the object, I can access the static method. Now once I'm accessing the static method, once I display that method, these values will go and sit in the private constructor, and in the display method I'm using those variables, I'm adding those values, that is 12 and 20. When it goes and sits here, x is equal to 12, y is equal to 20, then I'm adding here a is 12 and 20, that is it will give me the output as 32. We'll see whether it provides us the output. Once it is done, it is provided us the output as 32. This is what we expected. What I am trying to tell you is, if you are having a private constructor, and if you want to use the private constructor, then you have to use a static method of that class, then only you can use the private constructor. You should be must and should you should be having a static method to use the private constructor. This is the demo for private constructor. Thank you. Have a great day. Please subscribe to Ankpro training below.